Distinguished Professor, Executive Education at IIM Mumbai, and he will be the session chair for this session. Ladies and gentlemen, we're living in an age where companies are expected to play a very pivotal role, not just in driving economic success for this nation, but also in shaping the future of planet and society. So what does this shifting landscape look like, and how are companies themselves now responding to these new roles, new challenges? What does it mean for consumers and the wider world? So our session now is on the changing landscape of corporate responsibility. Over to you.
Thank you, Frisha. So welcome back again, all of you. As she said in the morning, that on the flip side of your name tag, we have every profile of the speakers. So I'll not take much time to introduce them, but very quickly, Shefali Goradia, the chairperson. She's the first chairperson of Deloitte India, but she's now in charge for the Deloitte South Asia. Welcome, Shefali. Mr. Prakash Afte, old friend, the former chairman of the Kotak Mahindra Bank, currently chairman of the Blue Dart, and sits on multiple boards. Thank you, Prakash, for coming all the way from Pune this morning for us. Jitesh Shetty, he's a serial entrepreneur and a technology guy. One of his previous technology company got bought out by Google, and now he runs Credible ESG, which is a real-time measuring platform technology-wise for all the inputs that you need for your sustainability reports and the other reports also. So he'll talk more detail later on. Welcome, Jitesh. So we have seen that over a period of time, this corporate responsibility landscape has changed. Let me just quickly give you a couple of things that in India, I have had a privilege of being a part of the SEBI Committee of Corporate Governance, Committee of Ministry of Corporate Affairs and all. And I have interacted with several ministers and bureaucrats. And the thinking there is that they do not want to seed bring the seeds from outside and 100% follow the regulations which are there in United States and in Europe. And rightly so, because culturally, India is a very, very different country. Our boards are populated with very different kinds of profile. Our societal expectations from our boards and our companies are very, very different. And therefore, it is important that while we take the best practices from the rest of the world, we also try and come up with our own script in terms of our corporate responsibility. For example, one little thing I'd like to share with you is that in India, we like to call it corporate social responsibility, CSR. But in the United States, they prefer to call it corporate responsibility. Because, and I would pick the brains of our speakers here. So we are the first country which in 2014, April 1st, effective, mandated 2% of the corporate social responsibility to be put aside. And I was on the committee, as I told you, of Ministry of Corporate Affairs, and then I asked the minister then that it's like mandating philanthropy. Why are you mandating 2% philanthropy and slapping it on the companies? You know what was his answer? He said only one single department of Government of India, which is Social Welfare Department, has a budget of 45,000 crores. And in the first year of CSR 2% regulation being mandated, what we are expecting from corporate India will be only 20,000 crores. But he says that the managerial capability, the strategic thinking with which this corporate India is going to deploy that 20,000 crore will yield the results and the outcomes which will be many folds bigger than 45,000 crore. Aha, that stole my vote. And I said, all right, we must go for it. So with that background, I want to come to you, Shefali, first. I mean, why don't you first share with us your overall thoughts on corporate responsibility? And since you're aware that this 2% thing is there, you're also on the board of Deloitte and South Asia, and therefore you, in that capacity, interact with the global partners of Deloitte. So what are the thoughts around corporate responsibility? Over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chauhan. Good morning, all of you. In terms of the CSR, I think one of the trends that we are seeing now is that globally there is a whole mindset shift. From the way it started, more of a philanthropic activity and the CSR contribution. Of course, in India, we started off as a mandatory contribution. In many other countries, there is nothing, it's not a mandatory contribution, more of voluntary, but each company is expected to contribute in some way or the other. From there is a mindset shift, and it is now more of an ESG approach, which is on, of course, the environmental, social governance, but how companies are now adopting ESG as a part of their core business strategy. And especially in Europe, I think there is a lot that we see where there is a lot of emphasis on how the companies are really taking to ESG in everything they do. So all of the business strategies, the activities, the expansion, how the companies operate, the supply chain, everything is now viewed from an ESG lens, which is a big mindset shift. The other thing we do see is, the evolving regulatory framework and the reporting standards. Like EU has the sustainability, reporting directive. They also have the sustainability due diligence directive, where all the companies are also expected to evaluate their supply chain and make an assessment of the environmental and the human rights risks. And if they find anything, then they are expected to, come up with a mitigation plan for it. Now, of course, there are conflicts about, whether is this competitive enough or does it really put those companies at a disadvantage? While the directive has been there and the regulators do give dispensation from it from time to time, just for appropriate cases. But I do foresee that in future we might have something similar in India as well. So there is a lot of focus on how the companies are regulating themselves, just not merely from a compliance perspective, but also just for the sake of full transparency, reporting some of their ESG directives. There is a lot of stakeholder engagement. So, whether it is the shareholders, the government, the employees, we see, especially as Deloitte, where we engage with a lot of Gen Z employees, there is a lot of times when we are hiring people, they are coming and asking us, what is our ESG plan, right? So there is a lot more awareness about it, and the companies generally want to do the right thing. So that's another mindset shift. The other aspect that we do see a lot more globally and not yet as much in India is the impact-driven investment. It's beginning to happen, but for example, the green bonds or the social bonds, and generally the focus on how the companies can use the ESG-linked financing options. I think that we are yet to see as much in India, and which will happen soon. Overall commitment from a climate perspective or a net zero emissions, there are companies like AstraZeneca and others who have announced about their 100% renewable, energy being used. There are companies in India as well, whether it is Reliance, whether it is, Tata Power, they have done a lot of notable things in terms of their net zero commitments and their strategy and plan to come forward with it. But overall, the societal impact in terms of whether it is, helping the second and third tier cities in coming up with a skilling program where they are able to, groom some of the local talent and bring them into mainstream workforce. I think that is something that we see. It is, government is focusing a lot on it. We at Deloitte, we've got a Heartland program, which we are leading with the state governments in trying to, train some of the local people and bringing them into the mainstream workforce. But we are yet to see that being implemented in as much scale. And, but again, I see this as a trend for the future.
Thanks, Shefali. So Prakash, I observed that in the United States, people have already begun to write the obituary of ESG before it reaches its nascent, its early stage of life. And the congressmen are divided vertically in the United States. Senators are divided in terms of their thinking. And the famous letter which Larry Fink used to write to all top CEOs. You know, BlackRock, one of the biggest financial international institution, stopped writing that letter to CEOs with a focus on, it's a bit controversial thing I'm putting on the table, but at the same time, the better part of it I see in United States that within the country, there are so many champions of sustainability that they have already invested millions of dollars in clean energy, decarbonization technologies and others. So regardless of what administration takes a position, the industry would continue to sort of invest because, as I said in the morning, it's in the enlightened self-interest of the companies to do so. Your thoughts on this? Because you have been a chairman of the multinational companies, Indian companies. So what is the thinking towards the corporate responsibility from two perspectives?
Okay, I think first and foremost, a lot what is happening in US is surprising, and things go back and forth. And I agree with much what was mentioned, that the awareness has increased, the organizations are focusing. But I have a feeling that what we are doing is not enough. It is not corresponding to the urgency and the task which is there before us. So whether it is multinational companies or the local companies, I think we need to focus much more onto why I feel particularly in the context of what is right now happening in the USA, you know, with things being reversed, the US getting out of WHO, I have a feeling that we need to revisit how we landed here. And I feel that the way we landed here is very often forgotten, and we are not, introspecting. You mentioned about the classic dilemma between the profits versus spending the money on the social or social responsibility aspects, you know. Milton Friedman was mentioned by Professor King. So what happened is how we have landed in the 70s, it was all about creating value for the shareholders. You know, that is what was the focus of everyone. At the same time in the 70s, what happened is the first UN conference happened at Stockholm. That was about One Earth. It is the first conference ever, out of which is the predecessor of all the subsequent conferences. What has happened in the subsequent 50 years? Number of conferences have taken up, number of accords have been signed. The first 26 principles which were announced there have substantially not been met. On the environment side, the 50-year, the population has doubled. The energy consumption, overall energy consumption has become 2.5 times. Electricity consumption has become 4 times. And we are having all kinds of problems with regard to sustainability has come to the fore. So we have not done enough. Corporate was a party to it, but it was a shared responsibility. Now let us look at what corporate did, where it was its own responsibility. 70s, it spent time in focusing on shareholder value. 80s, it says customer is the king. And then it came in with quality. 90s went in, era of globalization. By the year 2000 came, it was a flat world, as the other Friedman mentioned, told us that now it has become a flat world. And where all this has taken with regard to this tremendous growth which happened, what happened to environment? Nobody paid attention to this. So while we do good speaking, whether we are really giving the necessary priorities to it. Instead of that, what happened is 2001 Enron, 2002 WorldCom, followed by that Lehman Brothers, followed by that we had our own Satyam, we had the Volkswagen issue in 2015. So the question is, corporates need to little bit introspect as to, while everything is looking nice and is looking possible, we have not done enough in the past, and we have a backlog which has to be caught up. And I only have a hope that if this self-introspection is done, second good thing which has happened, I feel in last 10 to 15 years, is that the awareness has come. So once the awareness has come, I think you mentioned that even in the US and other places, people are still wanting to go after sustainability irrespective of the reversal of the government positions. So I have a feeling this is a good work and for which the awareness has come and it will not die down, even if the government policy will change. That is what is the thrust we need to give, but we need to give priority. The first Stockholm conference was attended by only two heads of governments. One was Sweden's Prime Minister, second was India's Prime Minister. Where were all the rest? There was no priority. Today you see, you go to Glasgow COP, you go to Paris Award, you will all see the heads of the governments coming there. Same is the case with the corporates. I think we need to give the priority and we need to show the urgency. Then only we will be able to overcome and make this progress. Thank you.
Thanks, Prakash. You mentioned, and Mervyn King also mentioned about the Milton Friedman. I want to tell you this interesting thing that for 30 long years, Milton Friedman said that the purpose of business is to make profit. And it ruled the United States and all. But in 2019, there's a most powerful body of the world called BRT, Business Roundtable. The high and mighty CEOs and chairmen of around the world, lot of multinational, they got together. And exactly what Prakash said, that they had a relook at what has landed us here. And they redefined the purpose of business. And 250-word statement which came out in redefining the purpose of business by BRT, the word profit came much later. They talked about, you know, that's right. So they talked about the sustainability, Mother Earth, stakeholders, you know, and shareholders, and profit came much later. So which means to say that the business is a force for good as a principle or philosophy is being now practiced and believed by high and mighty CEOs around the world. So that's a positive part I want to share. Yes.
Yeah, just one point I'll make to that question. I think what's happening in the US is slightly ties to what Sanjeev Mehta said, right? I think the change there will be cosmetic. The word ESG will go under the rug, DI will go under the rug, but substantially, companies there will continue to push the sustainability agenda. So think about it, right? Musk is standing next to the president. Most of his businesses are around electrification. So there is no way substantially that will change. But I think cosmetically it will get pushed under the rug, right? That's what will happen there.
Great point, Jitesh. So let me come back to you again on this, that since you come from that tech background, generative AI has become a buzzword in many industries. Could you walk us through a real-world example of how tech platforms such as Credible is using Gen AI to streamline sustainability reporting? And what unique challenges do you see when applying this technology specifically in the sustainability domain?
Thank you.
Real-life examples.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Chauhan. Good afternoon, everyone. So just to give a little background, I'm the founder CEO of Credible. We work with 130 plus enterprises. They deploy our platform to get visibility into their sustainability posture, do reporting, and also get a sense of the risk in their supply chain. And we really meaningfully use this new technology called generative AI. We use what's called OpenAI and Anthropic under the hood, and we have built our own secret sauce on top of it. So one example I'll give is the hotel we are sitting in. They are our customer, Taj Hotels. And two workflows where GenAI is game-changing. One is in a very automated way, capturing sustainability data, right? For example, what's called Scope 3 data for a company like IHCL Flipkart is massive. So if you let a human do that, do the mapping of what have you bought in your procurement and what's its emission code, it's really, really tedious to do. So that's one example. So we do that data capture leveraging GenAI at a very, very large scale for companies like IHCL, Reliance Industries, Flipkart. Second, what happens is most enterprises, they need to do what's called an internal audit on their sustainability data they need to make sure that their data is accurate before they disclose it. So we give every enterprise a virtual internal auditor. So think about this hotel, the diesel they are consuming in DG set for the month of March. So some evidence goes to the corporate, some number goes, but how do you make sure that the evidence is accurate? So now what's unique about this new technology is that anything a human can do, you can make this technology do. This is very, very unique, right? This is one area where generative AI is very unique, and so we are applying that in sustainability, both within the enterprise to do what we call audit readiness, but also in the supply chain. So enterprises need to do diligence on their supply chain, irrespective of sustainability, and that's where it becomes a much more harder problem. Think of a company like Reliance Industries, data they're getting from large companies like Aramco upstream, but also a lot more smaller players. So how do you do diligence on that? So that's where is one real world area where we use, but many other areas where we use, but also what's happening in the market.
Thank you, Jitesh. That's quite credible, you know, working. I didn't know that even Taj Hotels, IHCL, you're doing the work. So probably otherwise I would have used you to get some discount for our conference. Okay, that was on a lighter side. So let me come back to you, Shefali. You see now, as I told you, we started off with 20,000 crore initially of corporate India, but since then, since 2014, corporate India has grown manyfold. And our contribution, I mean, corporate India's contribution towards corporate social responsibility is huge. Take us through what are the good practices or best strategies some of the corporates, large corporates are using, and do they face any challenge in implementing this 2% CSR thing?
Right. So definitely, you know, we've come a long way from where we started, right? 2014, when first we had this mandatory CSR requirement. Since then, I think the corporate contribution towards CSR has more than doubled. Most of the companies, they now look at long-term projects rather than short-term projects for CSR compliance, which means that, you know, they want something which is sustainable, which can show the impact. Where the challenge that is faced is more in terms of identifying the right NGOs to partner with, the scalability of some of these projects, and access to the rural areas, which is where there are some key gaps. Because a lot of funding that goes is also still in the metro cities. And you know, where we need them more is in the smaller cities or smaller towns and villages where there isn't enough infrastructure. And the companies that they don't have access to this infrastructure, I think they tend to then still keep channelizing the CSR more to these projects. The second challenge is also more in terms of the compliance standards, the reporting standards. I think there again, there is still a lot more complexity in terms of how the companies are reporting the data, collecting the data first of all. You know, many times, you know, there is no standard way of collecting the data or verifying, you know, whether this is really the accurate data of measurement of how the companies have really measured their outcomes on ESG. And then second is in terms of, you know, whether what they are reporting. I think sometimes it is still, we are facing these issues that it is only to the extent required it is being reported, right? Where there is, you know, now the expectation from the public at large is on a lot more transparency, and which is where we will see the companies evolve more. But as Jitesh also mentioned, I think use of technology in order to measure this data and the outcomes, and also to fast track the company's strategies in ESG compliance, I think that is really, really picking up. Including even, you know, using some of those technologies to simulate, you know, your climate change impact on your supply chains. And it can really make you, you know, ready. And this is where, you know, as the directors on the board, I think many of us have to constantly keep asking those questions. You know, are the companies really doing enough in order to really map out everything that's going on? And yes, regardless of what one country thinks of the climate change or not, but I think the rest of the world is already set up on that path. A lot of things are already being done on the net zero commitments and reducing the carbon footprint, right? So are we really doing enough is something that all of us need to ask.
Thanks, Shefal. You mentioned about the board members and their role on, right in this room, I was doing back of the envelope calculation, you know, the number of independent directors who are present in this room and the kind of company they are sitting on that, their market capitalization is huge. But that's not really what I'm driving at. What I'm driving at that, Prakash, you have been on several boards, and she talked about the government has mandated there should be a CSR committee of the board. And those are the process-related things. But in actual, how can the board members really ensure that the 2% money which goes is strategically spent for the real 17 SDG, I would say, you know. And so that how part, if you can share, I've been on several board, you're on several board, they are on several board. So maybe next week or next day when we have this board meeting, we begin to ask those right kind of question and we begin to add to this whole process of outcome.
Okay, I think I'm glad you mentioned the SDGs. What has happened, in my view, okay, first and foremost, let us talk about the board. What matters in a company for the corporate responsibility as a whole, you know, forget about this 2% thing, is the tone at the top management and the board working together to give a very clear message to the organization as to how are we handling this dilemma about wanting to maximize the profit versus, you know, doing the right thing. And I have a feeling that every company, depending on in which market it works, how it is, what stage it is, it has its own challenges, but it has its own solutions also. And I have a feeling that it is the duty of the board and the top management to set this tone and make it clear as to what are our responsibilities. Because what happens is, compliance is one thing, it is mandated by law. It is done by everyone. Then there are governance principles, which I think there is some amount of interpretation and insight is required from the point of the board. Then there is, of course, taking the responsibility for certain things which your company is doing. That is where I have a feeling that the foresight of the board comes into picture as to which are the areas in which our company needs to do more. Setting it out as a responsibility or as a commitment. It is not because we are discharging some legal requirement and ticking off a box which is there on the compliance part, but we are doing something solid and something holistic. And then comes probably on top of that comes the feeling of the, so to say, the stewardship, you know, that means we will take care of certain things from, you know, cradle to the grave. That means holding on the complete responsibility, irrespective of what commitment we might have made, you know, it is a purpose-driven thing. And I have a feeling that this hierarchy needs to be set in the board discourse around these times and has to percolate down the organization through the, you know, various meetings, what we are doing. Now, with regard to the discharge of responsibilities within the CSR and how we handle it, I have a feeling that 2%, like she said, 2014 till now, there is a big change. But I find one difficulty here is that our responsibility lies in number of areas. If we can put 2 or 3 verticals which any particular organization will face. One is some social philanthropic kind of responsibility. Second is, you know, around trying to improve your processes to make your own supply chains and everything else sustainable. Third thing is about, you know, giving the right information to the investors, being transparent, being ethical. And now what happens is 2% is mandated. We allocate that fund, we use that fund, but I feel that we are very much on the philanthropic side and that fund goes much less on the other vertical movements. At the moment, very much the focus is on the, and that needs to slightly, you know, change as we go forward. Because some of the tasks which these large companies do can be done by many others. And you don't have to have, but then in order to fill up that 2% thing, people take a lot of such projects, reporting becomes easy. You know, you are in a position to see that the money is utilized. So I have a feeling there is a little bit of tweaking required over there.
So the point that you're making brings me to the thought that I think strategic CSR is extremely important. It's not just spending the 2% on philanthropic things, but picking and choosing the, it should be embedded in the strategy of the company. We'll come to it as a last round, but let me come to you, Jitesh. Jitesh, implementing this sustainability reporting and measuring of data and all could be costly for medium-sized companies. And in India, it's true for even internationally that SMEs are the backbone of the entire, and the cleaning of the supply chain is one of the major issues in sustainability. How do you think the technology can really simplify the cost or reduce the cost and simplify the process even for the smaller size companies? And how do the companies like you can help them?
Yeah, thank you. I think that's a great question. So at a very simple level, what any tech does is it creates a degree of automation. That's one. Even when you look at Gen AI, at a very basic level, it is smartly automating some workflows. That's one. Second, what continues to happen is the cost of technology keeps dropping. If you look at the public cloud, even if you look at the current AI providers, the cost keeps dropping. So technology intervention helps automate more, reduce the cost, both for the enterprise, but also other value chain providers. So we work with generally public companies, but then mid-cap companies around the world. But their suppliers, they have to engage with the credible platform. For example, a company like Flipkart, when they're collecting supplier data, primary data, they have to engage with the platform. So we make sure in our technology that there's a degree of automation which doesn't put a burden on the SME or the MSME. Because one is it's a direct cost, but second is also they will just not respond, they will not engage. There is today no strict regulation anywhere around the world for SME to do disclosure. It is really the enterprises whose suppliers they are asking for this data. So there is a forcing function to really make technology easy for them so that they can provide data, right? So that's naturally happening. Heavy degree of automation, low cost of technology intervention. So when that happens, the burden is reducing from these suppliers, right? There's a lot more we do specifically. For example, one of the things we do is we have a piece of technology which will index all the suppliers, even private companies, and look for signals in the public space about those companies, and we feed those signals to these large enterprises. It gives some degree of idea to these enterprises, what is the posture of these suppliers you're working with, right? And then we do equivalent of what you see in Google, like claim the page. So if you're a supplier and this is the data we have on you, you can come here, claim the page, and provide more primary data. So I think it's a combination of those things. Heavy degree of automation, the cost of technology keeps dropping, and then working with these large enterprises to create these incentive models and make it easy for SMEs to provide data.
Great explanation. I think I'm convinced, I'm sure, so are you, that technology in India will really help us to scale up and catch up with the rest of the world with the global trends, you know. And that's the only way to scale up fast. And corporates are the best equipped to do that. Now, quickly, I'm mindful of the fact that in the previous session, we overrun in terms of time, so we have to manage time in every following session. A very quick take on strategic CSR by each one of you. So let me start with you, Chef Ali.
I think strategic CSR, no different from the points that I've already made. Using technology, tone at the top, asking management the questions, in everything that we do, everything that the organization does on, how are we doing on ESG compliance? And what is our scorecard? Having that ESG scorecard always at the back of the mind, I think, that is really something useful. Simple things about, just the whole shift towards circular economy, repair, reuse, so that, we are avoiding wasteful, resources. So things like that, if, those questions are asked and the management sets out its strategy, keeping those things in mind, I think, it's the small things that will add up eventually.
Thanks. You, Prakash?
Indeed, I think quite well said, all points very well covered. I think technology is a great enabler. And they say, okay, what is not measured, it cannot be then improved. You have no chance of improving. Now technology allows us to get a huge amount of data points along our operations, which helps us then to improve the performance. And therefore, one of the strategies the management should have without any expense is to challenge every consumption, to make sure that whether every resource is being utilized correctly, whether how the waste can be reduced, and how the recycling, the circular economy can be going, and there can be a measure around that, which I think the technology can provide. This is what is your supply chain today, and these are what are the opportunities. And so this sustainability will become a profitable, this conflict between profit and sustainability, will go away. And therefore, I have a feeling that that is where the organization should focus their strategy.
Sure, the points which Prakash made, about the questioning every consumption, and that takes you to the efficiency improvement within the organization, regardless of what the regulators want you to do. This is precisely the central theme of the book that we are presenting to some of our speakers by now. One of the greatest thinker on sustainability is Mr. Paul Polman, Sanjeev's former boss, and thanks Sanjeev, you introduced us to him, and by now he's become a good friend of Asian Center. The book I recommend to every one of you should buy, even if it is little late. It's called Net Positive. The book's name is Net Positive. Please try and see. Great ideas, and Paul comes up with his regular letter also. If you can follow, you'll catch many of the ideas. I'll come back to the audience, particularly to a few independent directors and 2 questions. But before that, the take of Jitesh on strategic CSR.
I think one is don't be fake and cosmetic. Second is have a very strong rigor on capital efficiency, that everything you're doing is having an impact. There is very little overhead. Third, use technology to get better visibility into your capital allocation for CSR, how it's having impact. And fourth, your stakeholders, both internal and external. So play in that turf, right? Work in that turf, go deeper, understand projects that really impact those stakeholders, so that you have then a trickle effect, right? Where they get motivated and you have that trickle effect going on.
Great point. Thanks, Jitesh. Over to you. Anybody from the audience would like to ask any question? Homi? Narshir, yes?
All the discussion on sustainability I've been hearing addresses the supply side.
Take the mic, please.
I think everyone can hear me. Anyway, all the discussion on sustainability addresses the supply side. It doesn't address the demand side. How do you induce your customers to consume less of your product? That is genuine social responsibility. I give you the example of this company called Patagonia. They make outdoor wear. They advertised on Black Friday in the US, a full-page ad in the New York Times when people still read newspapers. One of their jackets. Do not buy this jacket unless you actually need another jacket. That is responsible, sustainable conduct. That I do not see discussed at all.
Thank you. Someday we will reach there, and hopefully companies would, yeah, thanks. Yeah, anyone? Yes, I will give a chance to lady there.
I completely agree with him, and this was a discussion I was having earlier outside, saying the heart or the biggest crux of problem on sustainability is consumerism. And we are, as companies, driving consumerism. Unless we reduce consumerism or reduce consumption.
Yeah, I can take a stab at that, right?
Please.
So I think it's not fully true that corporates don't support, reuse, recycle. I think we are not honest, right? If we are saying that. Today, the way Patagonia is an extreme example, right? I respect them, amazing company. But corporates do have programs to recycle, reuse, and that's gaining momentum, right? I think the good news is that's becoming more and more popular, both on the retail side, but also on the manufacturing side.
No, great point, but I'll come to, why don't you start from yourself? The responsible consumption is extremely, extremely important. When we go to the movies today, our Coke bottles are becoming so big, our helping with the popcorn is becoming so big, you know, and we hardly consume some percentage of it and dump it out. So they say charity begins at home, sustainability, let sustainability begin at home. On that note, I think we'd like to bring this discussion to an end. Can I'm sorry we're running out of time, so there are so many hands going up, but I have to strictly manage the time. Can we have a big round of applause for our panelists, please? Prisha.
A session like this that has given us so much to question as well as think about. To the two gentlemen that had raised your hands, we're going to have a lunch break after the other session after this. I'm sure our panelists will be around and you can definitely ask your questions personally to them. But of course, we would like to present the three of you with the book that Professor Chauhan just mentioned. So could I please have the book on stage? And we would like to present this as a token of our appreciation. Shefali ma'am, first, of course, to you. Thank you so much for being here with us. And of course, to Mr. Prakash Apte. And to Mr. Jitesh Shetty. Mr. Shetty, actually, Taj Lands End is also one of my clients. I run a beach cleanup movement for the last 191 weeks. And all their employees, when they get initiated, the first thing they have to do is come and help us clean the beach. So we have that in common as well. Let's